So thank you everybody for joining today and welcome to the webinar. You may have just seen that I've just started recording this session, so please be aware that we're recording the webinar to share afterwards. But otherwise, thank you for joining. My name is Ben Saxton and I'm presenting today alongside Robert Petterson from Epista. So I work at Formpipe, where I head up our sales activity. I've been at Formpipe nearly 5 years, and for the majority of that time, been working with Epista Life Science as well. So our relationship goes quite a long way back. We have previously worked on EQMS and EDMS products, where a lot of you know us from, and now we're heading up our work within digital preservation, and that's the topic that we're going to go through today. And my main role at Formpipe is balancing the delivery of compliance-based product along with the commercial elements, so making sure that we can show the commercial benefit of introducing the product to our clients and the workplace. I'll just hand over to Robert to introduce himself now.
Well, thank you, Ben. Robert Peterson. I'm responsible for the Swedish part of Epista Life Science, and we're a consultancy working with digitalization related questions in the life science area. And in this specific case, I think it's an interesting aspect to share with the industry, and I hope to share my view of this. Obviously, I'm always also Swedish speaking. As Ben is not, we chosen to do this in English. If there's someone who wishes to ask a question and do this in Swedish, please go ahead and we'll translate this so Ben can follow us also. Thank you for joining. Also, if there's any question during the session, please either write it in the chat or just speak out, and we'll do our best to answer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robert. So today, what we plan to go through is we're going to start with some PowerPoint, but don't worry, we'll then get on to showing live product, a live demo as well. But first of all, we just need to face and acknowledge the challenge that we do have within life science, and why we do need to hold on to documents and objects, records, and why we approach this through preservation rather than not just storage. Some organizations do look at extending their storage either through virtual machines or file explorers, and we do often come up against that discussion, especially within an IT environment where we are educating some of our clients on what we mean by preservation. So we'll tackle that at the start. Then we'll move into actual live product and look at preservation and how that achieves the compliance aspect. This is focused upon where we need to maintain the access, controlled access, to be able to view and use documents, records, data, objects for a number of different reasons. I'm then going to show how we make the ingestion of this very simple and a lot easier by using our products than it can be. So often the challenge we see is that people struggle to be able to get the actual objects and the documents into a preservation platform. Well, we have a really nice migration tool, and I'll show within a demo organization how simple we can make that ingestion process. We're then going to look again wider across the organization and what we call system retirement. Some people will call it application retirement, some people will call it system decommissioning. There are lots of different phrases for system retirement, and this is where we can turn off expensive, resource heavy systems, because we're bringing the content, the documents, the objects into a shared preservation platform. And that's when we do start to make considerable cost savings, when it can be quite exciting when we look across the whole portfolio of an organization. And then finally, to finish off, I'll also just allow us to look a little bit internally and show you some of the tools that we've got within Formpipe for bringing preservation into your everyday practice. And this is because we hope that we will help you overcome the barrier of user adoption. And if we can make it easier for our end users to preserve on a day-to-day basis, then you will not build up the big migration projects that you may have facing you soon from the legacy systems. So bringing preservation into daily life is where we spend a lot of our development time. So just to recap, that is looking at compliance. It's then looking at how we can introduce cost savings, real life cost savings, and then also bring in efficiency in.
Well, before we kick off this thing, I would like to ask if there's someone that want to share a specific reason or a requested takeaway from the session. If you're working on a situation that you would like to address specifically, because then we could maybe use that also to do the explanation of these things more specifically directed to your specific case. If there's anyone who wants to share something specific, please go ahead. We can do this along the speak, of course, also, but if we do it in the start, it might be a good way of giving you an even better value of this, because we are, of course, plan this to be as specific, but also with some broadness so that it will fit people's interests. Anyone want to share something? It is fine with me also. So the reason to my interest of this is, as a background in consulting, we come across a lot of different situations, and very often the work we do is implementation, validation activities for new systems. And once in a while, there's a situation where by different reasons are not able to migrate data into the new system if there's a replacement. And I came across a few different situations myself in my work, and a trend in these observations are ERP systems where the data model and format are not compatible with the new system in any way, meaning that a migration from the system you are leaving into the new one is such a big project, so people choose to stay on to keep the legacy system alive and continue run with a new one. I've seen this a few times, and I think that it is difficult for an IT department or for an organization to manage these things. There are issues here. Another situation is that we see once in a while is standalone system. And it can be environmental monitoring systems, for instance, temperature measuring and so on in production or lab environments. It can also be lab systems where it is not possible to migrate data because of old data structures, old technology, and so on. So these systems are often stored somewhere, and basically they are still in a validated state because you once in a while need to go in and look into the data. So these are the situations I've come across, and you probably have more examples. And my view of this is, and my contribution here is that I've looked through some of the cases, and also from a financial point of view, because I think that with all this compliance work we are executing, one also needs to have a sound financial view of things. So I have I've identified a few cost drivers that we will go through later on in the presentation. And what we see here, and we'll get back to this, is that if there's a variation, if there are more than one system or the complexity is great, there's definitely some business benefits of going in the direction of a preservation platform instead of maintaining legacy systems. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's what we'll be working through today. So to move ahead, the first thing is acknowledging the challenge that we are facing. So here we're representing on this slide the organization, the life science organization, as being the three person icon there. That's an organization. And we do still need to be able to access these systems because we need to be able to get to the documents, the objects and the data. And we cannot lose that access. Now, these systems can be products, so they could be EDMSs, they could be servers, they could be cloud-based products as well. Often we know about them, often they can be hidden, either due to different geographic areas within our business, or maybe project groups or hierarchy, structure hierarchy within our business that doesn't allow us to have visibility. So we acknowledge that when we look wide across the whole IT portfolio, it can be quite a wide-ranging group of systems that we need to maintain to be able to get access to. And obviously the reason for why we want to get access to that can be internal. It can be utilizing the data and learning from the data, or it can be external. That can be driven by customers or even more likely by regulatory authority. So that's the acknowledgement of the challenge that we've got. If we're doing that, it does mean that we're probably running systems that are no longer supported. And as Robert alluded to, we need to acknowledge that we are probably running license, hosting and maintenance cost for maintaining the systems that we've got. And then also, which interests me greatly, is often there's a specific IT person responsible for running a system, and they're indicated down here. And when we look at even older systems, often this will be just one specific person who knows how to run the particular server with the legacy application on. So you are reliant upon one particular person, and we're trying to take that burden away and move them onto one particular platform. So this is an acknowledgement of the problem that we're facing and the one that we're going to meet with preservation. So we introduced digital preservation. I've put an asterisk on the slide here. This is where I can talk at great length and sometimes need to be stopped. But digital preservation is a very broad subject. It's born out of national archives and the public sector requirements, and then we use it within private sector as well. We're focusing just on one area within digital preservation, which is around system retirement, application retirement, decommissioning, what we can do with the content that comes out of these systems that we no longer use on a day-to-day business within our organizations. So what we do at Formpipe is we've got a product that's about 10 years old, and it was born out of the public sector requirements within Sweden. So the most digitized society within Europe has driven the requirements of our product. It also follows something called the OASE format, which is the image that you're seeing on screen here, which was born out of the space race in the 60s, believe it or not. Some of the acronyms you see on the screen of SIP, APE and DIP, you'll also see within the product, because we're following this format, which is widely accepted as the best practice for digital preservation. Over years, this has grown into a whole number of different ISO standards. Most markedly is 14721 and 15489, though we also adhere to other ones as well. And just a note on ISO, here at Formpipe, the product and the delivery is 27001 accredited. So we also take preservation best practice and also security information. And then also within digital preservation, we are also supporters of the Preservation Coalition. Again, they were born out of academia, memory institutions, public sector requirements, but they're more and more interested in understanding what we need to do within the private sector to properly preserve for the long term digitally. And their most recent members are people like Pernod Ricard, Diageo Group, British Telecom. So larger private sector organisations are starting to acknowledge that we can benefit from preserving rather than just storing. So my last slide, and then I'll move into real product, which I'm sure you're all eager to see. But this is a good visual representation of what I'm going to show within software. The first thing is our preservation platform is called Long-Term Archive, and I'm showing that here is a large purple box. And the items you see moving in there are all the tools and functions and controls you'd expect to see. So if you do have anybody who's an actual archivist within your organization, first of all, that's a rarity. Normally it just becomes part of your job role. But if you do, you'd allow them to go and look at the product, and you'll see that we've got everything that 10 years of testing and development within the public sector Sweden has been built into the product. Now, in all acknowledgement, within private sector, we probably use 30 to 40% of the tools and functions within the product to meet our requirements. But we then have our migration tool. And what our migration tool gives us is the ability to accept output from all different types of systems, whether that be in the form of data, databases, files, documents, objects. And we can take that, put it into the migration tool, and then we can pre-prepare the data and the objects before we ingest into long-term archive. The beauty here for you as the client and for the project is that we're able to do a lot of the preparation before we ingest, so that we then know we've got the structure and the restrictions on the access to the objects and the documents once we've ingested into long-term archive. And that follows all the digital preservation best practice rules. So often we'll start with an object, and we'll also convert it to a preservation object. A really good example of a project we're running through at the moment is we're taking a lot of email, so .msg files. We're also converting them to PDFA. Then we're ingesting them along with the metadata in an XML format to provide us with the archive information package within long-term archive. Okay, so that's an introduction. I'm pretty sure you want to go and see products. So whilst I'm just changing screens, if anybody's got a question at this point, please do either interrupt or just hit the chat. Okay, so I'm using a browser, I'm using Chrome. I'm just going to sign into long-term archive using a persona called Betty Black. So she's giving me access to the server. Obviously, due to COVID, I'm working on my home Wi-Fi, so if it goes a little bit slow at times, it's probably due to that. So here Betty has got access. You can see it's a very simple interface, and I'll come back a little bit later to what we can do within the dashboard. What I want to show you first, though, is that Betty can go through and she can actually see a number of different archives. She can see 3 different archives, and we'll deal with permissions a little bit later as well. But if I go into this particular archive, for the first time, we can see the search criteria. Now, search criteria is built by the metadata fields that we're given on the ingest. So everything's driven by the different metadata fields. If we just go and run a search blank, we'll come back and you can see that there's no items within this archive at the moment. And this is because I want to run an ingest live for you during the webinar. So I'm just proving here that this archive is currently empty. There's nothing within it. And now I want to go and show you how simple it is for us to ingest. So I've just clicked onto the server to be able to do this. And first of all, I'm going to show the migration tool. And this is the workflow that we're running through for this particular example. So here we have an input location. In this example, it's a File Explorer input, but you can see all the different input connectors that we have. So as long as we can get the output from your legacy system, then we're pretty sure, 95% sure that we can handle that, those objects and be able to run them through a workflow, which will then result in the output to the preservation platform, long-term archive. So here we take documents, data and objects in, we perform some workflow steps, and then we output to long-term archive. So in this particular example, I'm going to go and pick up a Excel spreadsheet here. And I'm just going to go and drop it into this file location that the migration tool is monitoring. And this will kick off the ingestion of 31 different records into long-term archive. So this should happen quite quickly. So if I paste into there, you can see I pasted and then it disappeared. And this means that the migration tool has been monitoring that location. It's picked up that there's a new file, and based upon the rules that we've built within this workflow, it's picked up that file and the associated documents, and it's now running them through this process to output into long-term archive. So back to my archive here with Betty, and if I do another search blank, you can now see we're nearly there. We've got 25 of those 31 objects have come across already. So what I'm showing here is a live ingestion of documents, metadata coming across from an output from a system that we've then put into the migration tool and ingested into long-term archive. I've just refreshed that and we've now got all 31 objects. Now, in this particular example, we're using financial documents. I know that's not particularly focused on our own area within life science, but we do this just to be generic across the actual range of demos that we do. Then with the tools that we've got within the product, we can narrow down the search, so we can look at only documents that are related to a company called Orchid, and we could go even more narrow on that and look at invoices only for the Orchid company. So immediately I'm trimming down my search using the search criteria which is inherent within the product to be able to get the document set that I require. If I then just choose one particular object there, for the first time you can see, I can move myself, the AIP, the archive information package stored within this particular area. Now you can have as many files that as you require within one AIP, within one archive information package. Commonly, like I said, we have three. You'd have the native object, the preservation object, and the metadata as well. In this case, I could just go and open the attachment, and based upon the confidentiality settings of the user, in this case Betty Black, that would determine what you can and can't do. And we'll come back and look at that as an admin setting. Then finally, I just wanted to finish life off for Betty by showing you the dashboard. So if there is a regular search that you do, you can save them, just as she has done here. Or you can also share a search. So in this scenario, a gentleman called Walter White has generated a search and then shared it with Betty. So with one click from a home page, she can go and run that particular search and get to her results as well. So we're really bringing the efficiency into the way that you can explore and query the preservation platform. Just going to pause there if there's any questions on the way that we actually go and access the AIPs or the way that we actually ingest the information into the preservation platform. Okay, as there's not, I've moved on and I'm now logged in as somebody with a lot more permission sets. In this case, it's the administrator, and they've gone into the same long-term archive system that Betty was seeing, but I've done this for a couple of reasons. The first is that I want to just show another view that we've got in this example where we've only got data, so where we haven't got documents. And again, we can handle that very, very easily. And if I just trim it down to make it a bit more attractive, here we can see all the data that we've taken across for one particular example. Then if we go and view the AIP in this scenario, we're not too bothered because we haven't got too many objects, but we can go and view the actual metadata stored behind in the table format that we wanted to store it. So a good example here is that we can take from quite archaic, quite old databases, whether that be Oracle, Lotus Notes, or SQL, and we can store that data with a visualization rule, which allows us to go and view it, just the pure data, as we need to be able to go and retrieve it. Equally, I want to introduce here the other elements that you have within the AIP, the Archive Information Package. We do have the ability to go and validate the integrity of the object. And what we're doing here is effectively running a checksum against the object that's currently stored compared to the one that was ingested on day one of the project. So you can run this and you can almost do it as a periodic review as well by setting a rule against it. Equally, we can go and view a log for all activity associated for that particular AIP within the audit view as well. And with it being a demo system, not too much happens within there, but you can go and view everything within that particular one AIP, or you could just go and have a look across all AIPs within your archive and just go and pick on a particular user or a particular activity. So the audit log, is very, very strong and enables you to keep a real good grasp over what's happening within your archives. And then the final thing I want to show from an administration point of view, which is very powerful for us within the private sector, is that we can also run deletion rules. So here we have a deletion rule that we can run against a particular archive to delete everything at 5 years and 1 day is actually the rule here. And the deletion rule means that you're also keeping on top of your archive, the amount of information that you're storing. You're not paying for any storage that you don't actually use. the thing that I really like about the deletion rules as well is that we can schedule them to happen. So we can schedule them to run the first Monday of every month based upon the rule of being for data over 5 years and 1 day. That will run in the background and make sure that we're up to date with everything stored within the archive. So any questions at this point about either the way that we ingest or the way that we administer the actual content within the archive for just one system? I'll hope that you're quiet, but you're still interested in the presentation. And I'll move ahead then and show how we can then open this up across a whole IT portfolio. And what I'm actually showing here is a real life project that we're running at the moment within one of our life science clients on the continent. So what we've got here is a production site where they run SAP as their ERP, but they're moving away from that current on-premise version of SAP and moving to a cloud version. So they've moved that was their primary reason for moving into long-term archive. But then once we got talking to them, they've also got some ad hoc. So this is actually a chromatography system that sits alone from the network. They've then got a LIMS system from Thermo Fisher. They've also got a document management system. It's actually an old Documentum system. And then they've got some training records to do with their staff just held on their own servers. And we've also got a digitization project for taking some of their paper records into a digital format. So although we actually got speaking to them about one particular system, we then looked at what we could do with them across the whole IT portfolio. And this is where it really started to get exciting from a financial aspect around the licenses and the hosting costs that we could actually retire for them. Now, I'm sure if you look into your own business at this point, you'll be thinking around the different systems, whether they be network, standalone, still within a maintenance period, or real old legacy stuff that you could afford to turn off. And just going back to the earlier slide that I showed, this is what we'd encourage, probably once we've got the initial system on board, to look wider within an organization and see how that could work. Now, the critical thing at this point is to also explore permissions within the archive, because this is where it most commonly comes up. Like, yes, that's fine, but how can we make sure that systems are segregated? And there's a number of ways that we do these, and I'm happy to talk about permissions at length. We've got a good video to talk about it as well. We do manage permissions based on users and groups. So very simple ways, first on users and groups. But then we've also got individual archives. Now here you can see we've got about 13 different archives within the demo system. You saw when I was logged in as Betty Black, she could actually only search on 3. So we've got the ability to trim down the permissions that way. And then we can trim them further, either on individual objects, or we can trim them on the search path criteria. So you may give certain, I'll come back to that one, Rosemary. We can set certain permissions against the way that people search. So you can enforce that some particular users only search upon a certain set of criteria based on the metadata that we ingested into long-term archives. So the basic message is, as long as we've got the ability to tag the metadata, we can build a search around it. And just before I answer Rosemary's question, I just want to prove this again with one specific user called Oliver Orange, who's only got access to see one particular archive. So he can only view the LIMS archive within this particular version of long-time archive, although there's 13 different archives within it. And he can store then a search against his dashboard, and he can search from his dashboard to get the results that he needs, even though, you know, there's 13 archives behind the scenes. Yes, so Rosemary, great question, thank you. So what we can do with the deletion rule, which is just one part of our data management workflow, is it can be set against archives, it can be set against different types of data, or it can be set against a piece of metadata to qualify the rule. So there's lots of different ways that we can build the deletion rule or the data management rule, because it may be a file upgrade that you want to do as well. So the flexibility is there to definitely manage what you're asking there in the chat. And then Rosemary's also asking, can different data owners be set for different data? Yes, you can. We tend to do that by archive. That tends to be the most common way that people set the different owners. But yes, of course, you can set the different data either by, again, qualified by metadata or file extension or source system are the general ways that we tend to do that. But in practice, like I say, people tend to segregate the data by archive. In the example I was giving on the PowerPoint, we'd probably have 6 different archives, one for each of the source or legacy systems that we're importing. But if we need to do it a different way, yes, we've got the flexibility within the product. Okay, thank you for the questions, Rosemary. Please let me know if we've answered them or if you want to ask a subsequent one. Otherwise, I'm going to come towards the end of what we wanted to show you today. And I just want to focus now on this area, which is us making the... Yes, we'll come to that next question as well. Thank you. Just to show the tool which enables us to make preservation business as usual. So I'll do this quite quickly because I've got one eye on the clock here. But really here, we're just focusing our development within Formpipe on making sure that we can make this as easy for users to adopt. We don't want to put that barrier in the way. Now, we've got a number of different tools that we can do this with. I'm just going to show one in this scenario. And again, to do this, I'll just jump onto the server. And here, I'm just picking on the fact that we can take any printable object. In this case, it's a PDF. Now, if I go and do a print for this, you can see here I've got an option using print queue technology, really. I've got an option here to print to a long-term archive. If I then go and print here, instead of printing the document, it opens up a tool that we call Meta, and it allows us to add the metadata. And if I just do FP20 demo, I can name the document. And in this case, we've got 7 different fields that it's asking us to complete. You can have more or you can have less if you really want to lower that barrier to people using. Here we're just putting in a number of fields. I'll say that this is a contract. I'll apply it to the Calliope. And I'll actually make, let's pick on Michael Sodergren to be responsible for this. So I'm entering metadata. I'll then send it off. I've never left my day-to-day interface here, but that's now ingested the document into long-term archive to be stored with all the preservation rules that we can set within that product just through that interface that the end user had. And if I just come back in and search within the meta archive within the system, you can see the document that I've just sent through. Yes, it's this one here, FP20 demo webinar with Michael Sodergren as being the one responsible. So again, I'm just proving that the ingestion barrier is not there. We're removing that through that tool. Okay, so hopefully you found that interesting. I'm going to hand back to Robert, and through what Robert's going to talk about, I think he'll go to address to some degree the question you've just asked there around costs, Rosemary.
Well, thanks again, Ben. From my perspective, it's important to look into not only the benefits, because they are sometimes obvious, but also look into the cost aspect of entering a new system or a new era of a system platform. And therefore, I always like the concept of a business case. And in this aspect, I would like to address some cost drivers that I think is important and can be relevant in your specific case. I won't say that everybody are, but there will be some aspects that needs to be addressed, or at least assessed more closely if one is to build a business case. So what I've done is to look at cost drivers and compared two different scenarios. The first one is what I call keeping legacy data in legacy systems. And that would be the aspect of having your old system still maintained and still alive so that you can access the data as you always did, even though you might have invested in a new system that takes over the process, basically. You see this sometimes between document management systems, ERP systems, and so on, where the question of migration is very common. And I won't compare the cost drivers with the situation of choosing to go in the data preservation platform way. So if you look at licenses, for instance, one is to maintain a system. There's very often the situation that you still need to pay the licenses costs for that system when its lifetime. And of course, if you have multiple systems, that might be a considerable cost. So if you go on the data preservation platform approach instead, the licenses for the legacy systems can be discontinued, and the data can be migrated into the data preservation platform instead, and you only have one license to take care of. So in this specific situation, there's of course a monetary aspect that can be identified and calculated in a business case. Next driver from a cost perspective is periodic reviews. So if you stick to the legacy system, some level of periodic review needs to be done in order to call the system validated. Of course, there will probably be fewer changes and updates and so on, but there still might be patching of OSs or anything that maybe affects the legacy systems anyway. So the periodic review needs to be maintained. And again, if you're using a platform and removing multiple legacy systems and put them into data preservation platform, the periodic review will be focused on that platform and as the other systems are decommissioned. From this perspective, there's a resource situation, and one can calculate the resources spent on legacy system periodic reviewed in relation to the data preservation platform, obviously. Then we have user administration. Again, someone needs to be able to access the legacy systems, even though there might be no additional data work in it. But as you're keeping the system because you want to access it, and therefore there will be some kind of access user administration. And in the case that the person that can access the systems is not longer in the company, one needs to address another person that can do this. Of course, there are user administration for the data preservation platform, but that will be in one system only. And here you also have the resources aspect in your business case that you can use. There's also a training issue or data access issue, or I mean, in the situation where you have an audit or you need to withdraw some kind of data and to look at it irrespective of the situation, someone needs to know how to use the system. In the audit situation, you might need very quick access to answer a specific question, and you need a record right away. So in your legacy system, you still need to keep someone or some kind of data access and a level of knowledge that makes it possible for data extraction. If you're going the data preservation way, there is the possibility to have a few super users on the application that could support this, which potentially can reduce the need for data access administration, training things, and training aspects, and so on. So this is also a question of resources. So please, Ben, if you go to the next slide. Patching and upgrades. A certain level of patching needs to be maintained for the legacy systems. This can be rather difficult if the application is not possible to run on any kind of operative systems. And the aspects of patching can also kick off a need for revalidation of the system in order to verify that it still functions with a new patch setup. And if running multiple legacy systems, all of them on different operative systems, different databases, and so on, this has some aspect to it that needs to be taken care of. If you're going the data preservation route, there's only one platform to be maintained. It is also a live system, so in the case of adopting a system as a service delivery, these things will be delivered, and the regression testing can be set into a nice system that makes it possible to execute the revalidation in a contained way. The savings here are very often resources, but if you're not having the capabilities of validation, then there might be a monetary aspect to this. What we see in the situation with standalone systems is actually rather often that they are built for a certain hardware configuration. So when you buy the system, you also buy the hard disk. If you're, by any reason, the hard disk crashes, it might be difficult to continue to use the system. So this is a risk, of course, and it can also be rather difficult to accommodate this risk if it's not possible to buy a like-to-like replacement. If this is used by a system as a service delivery, you don't need to bother concerning hardware and management, because that would be a part of the deployment methodology. I see here that I'm cannibalizing time. I think you understand the concept of the cost drivers and the concept of looking into the situations of keeping legacy systems compared to a data preservation platform. I have backup, restore, migration also. Of course, from a migration point of view, some level of validation needs to be done in order to verify that this data that is moved over to the data preservation platform remains its data integrity. And you don't need to do that if you stay in the legacy systems, of course. So when going through this, I mentioned multiple systems a couple of times. So looking into this and to the cost drivers, an aspect of how many systems are you using today that are legacy systems has a great impact on a business case like this. So that will be a heavy component in order to verify how this business case will end up. So this is how it would be possible to show a positive business case in this situation, to look into the business, to the cost drivers, and this can also, of course, be supported by us. So if there's some kind of interest into the data preservation tool, we're more than happy to discuss this with you, and I know that Ben also would more than happily show you a lot of more details of the application.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, And we've just had another question as well from Rosemary around if there's any type of object or file that we cannot ingest. The short answer is no, that we haven't yet come across that, Rosemary. We have had the odd project where the challenge has been to extract the information from the legacy system. So particularly where we're working with very old systems. There's one story, I wasn't involved in the project, but where you had to physically be there on site to be able to put a wire in, to be able to extract the information. That's the one challenge that we do see from a client perspective. That obviously isn't Epista or Formpipe's responsibility, as much as we want to help the client succeed. If we can't get the information out, there's not a lot we can do. So as long as we're given access to the documents or the objects or the data, then no, we haven't yet had a scenario where we cannot manage that through the migration tool and ingest into long-term archive. So I hope that answers the questions that have been asked. Thank you very much for those who have asked and the participation in the webinar. Thank you. Yes, good, it answered that question. And that brings us to an end. So I'd like to thank you all for attending and particularly Robert for his contribution as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.